Time to grab your umbrella. A storm is on the way. Poetic peeps and gentle persons, in-betweeners and nonconformers, genders all and genders equal. Welcome to Eat the Storms, a poetry podcast. This is episode 6, season 8, and my name is Damien B Donnelly, and for the next hour and 20 minutes I get to be the host and producer and introduce you, or reintroduce you, to 4 incredible voices of modern poetry. And all this now available on most podcast platforms, including Spotify, Apple, Google, Breaker, Podbean, Player FM, Overcast, Pocket Cast, Castbox, Podcast Addicts and iTunes. We will be jet-setting off to the United States today, training our way up to Northern Ireland, ferrying ourselves across the sea to England, and then hovercrafting back to Dublin. Yet again today we have another diverse episode, although the one thing it does have in common is that each person is sharing a new collection or chapbook coming out or that has just been released. We turn to the voice of the crone, and with it the child, woman, mother as warrior. We explore anxiety, fatherhood, changing relationships, desirability, and then back to mother's jewels and out into homelessness and the songs we carry inside us all. And of course, at the end of today's show, as is now new to our 8th season of Eat the Storms, with already 670 international guests spread across 8 seasons, we have our new interview series. Well, really it's just a chat series because I'm not an interviewer, but it's a way of catching up with one of my guests on each of the episodes. And we talk about beginnings, how we first fell in love with poetry, why we first fell in love with poetry, how it affected us, moved us, and then we follow that through to see new collections and chapbooks and discover how they came to be. So all that is to come on today's show. So for now, I suggest you crank up the volume, cozy on down onto the couch, spread some cheese on the crackers, cut the cake, crack open either a can or make sure there's a fresh brew for the cup. This is Eat the Storms. My name is Damien B Donnelly, and I hope you enjoy the show. And my first guest today on the podcast is just about to launch a new poetry collection, is the current poet in residence at Poetry Ireland, and will be coming back at the end of today's show for Behind the Storms, our new chat segment where we discuss poetry, our love of it, how it took hold of us and what we did with it afterwards. Her new collection is called Dismantle and will be published in May this year by Salmon Poetry, who also published 2 of her other collections, 26 Letters of a New Alphabet in 2022, and also Tides Shifting Across My Sitting Room Floor in 2017. And prior to that, her debut collection, Take This Life, was published by Word on the Street Publishers in 2011. I am so excited to welcome to Eat the Storms the phenomenal Anne Tannam.
This is Anne Tannam, and I'm delighted to be reading this, the 8th season of Eat the Storms. Thank you so much to Damien Donnelly for inviting me to read again. I'm going to read a selection of poems from my forthcoming collection, Dismantle, which is coming out in April of this year with Salmon Poetry. Dismantle. You take them apart, the female first. Remove the clothes, uncover her plastic body. Glassy eyes stare straight ahead, avoiding your gaze. You start to pull. One leg pops out of the socket, then the other. Arms next. Still she won't look at you. The face, a blank expression, refusing to comply. The head takes several yanks before it yields. The sexless torso, a final accusation, slips through your hands, falls to the floor. The male next, the process much the same, though he appears to hold your gaze. Precipice. Magpies discover the wood pigeon nest in the tree outside the house. By the time you get there, the chicks are lying on the footpath, snow angels, bloodied wings fanning the concrete, heads caved in, a shimmering aura about their broken bodies, soft and yielding when you scoop them up, one first, then the other, placing them out of harm's way. Reminded of the afternoon when a young magpie flew down the chimney, its panicked attempts at flight, your hands firm around its body, heart beating wildly against the knife's edge. Those boys you used to teach, how like little gods they were. First year in school, the world had yet to hunt them down, chisel the softness from their cheeks, rip out their open hearts. How when they tired of racing full tilt across the yard, they would seek you out, lean into the comfort, press their cheek against your hand. Mother as vessel, as state, as indentured, as fulfillment, as sorrow, as calling, as fraught, as currency, as Madonna, as whole, as martyr, as fecund, as night feed, as freedom, as empty nest, as fertile earth, as gravitational pull, as prism, as umphalos, as treasure, as life-giver, as lethal, as warrior, as nature, as terror, as matriarch, as breast, as longing, as compromise, as status, as nurture, as strength, as lush, as veil of tears, as birthplace, as battlefield. Preparation for the search. Take a length of string, 2 plastic cups, something sharp to make a hole in the bottom of each. When you've made the holes, careful not to pierce skin, feed the length of string through each cup, knotting each end. Place 1 cup to your ear, keeping the string taut. Tell me, what do you hear? The sea, the wind, her voice rushing towards you. Feast on silence for 40 days and 40 nights until their name calling no longer touches you. Obedient child, dutiful mother, little woman. Smear your face with soot. A hand-drawn map of places you're likely to find her. Down the end of the garden, grubbing for worms. The morning after, laying out the body. In the bottom of the lake in the old country. Play wrestling wolf pups at the entrance to the cave. Hunkered down, waiting for the head to crown. Dress for snowstorms, scorched earth, swollen rivers. Dress like you're never coming back. When you find her, call out, crone, kalyak, baba yaga, loba, wild woman, old mother death, but she'll only answer to your name. Take me with you. She rarely gets straight to the point. Patience, she reminds you. Her hair a tangled nest of twigs and leaves. All the good stuff takes time. The earth's crust hardening. Slow shifting continents. The time it rained for 2 million years. The heavens opening. the earth's upturned face, throat a river mouth of quenched desire. Mother country. She asks if you ever miss it. Surfacing a memory. An afternoon in spring, the four of them running ahead to the playground, the sky darkening, a sudden storm, hailstones bouncing off the path, the grass, their exposed skin, the forever it took to get back home, your body a shield too small to stop their cries, fumbling to open the front door, the calm of the house, racing up the stairs, wet clothes discarded, 5 snug bodies in the bed, pink and drowsy, the afternoon, a lost adventure, a once upon a time.
Now from here in Dublin, we are heading west, out across the Atlantic and settling down in the northeast of the United States, in Virginia to be precise, for a writer whose debut chapbook, Funeral in the Wild, was just published by Kelsey Books. His poetry has appeared in various anthologies and magazines, including Anti-Heroin Chic, Black Bough Poetry, Fevers of the Mind, Ink, Sweat and Tears and Tiny Wren Lit. He is the editor-in-chief of East Ridge Review. Here today with dogwood trees, memories, relationships and anxieties, I'm very happy to welcome to Each the Storms for the first time, A.R Williams.
Hello, my name is A.R Williams, and I am a poet living in Virginia's Shenandoah Valley in the U.S. And a huge shout out to Damien for extending the invitation for me to read a few poems from my collection that was just published with Kelsey Books in this February 2024. The name of the collection is A Funeral in the Wild, and in the collection I have poems that explore the themes of memory, relationships, and the ever-changing nature of life and the natural world. And so I'm going to read 3 poems for you. The first poem touches on the themes of fatherhood and anxiety. This is War Zone. Piles of laundry amass throughout the house. Toys clutter floors like shrapnel, and children bound around every corner. The family beagle coughs in her sleep, her whole body shaking like a soldier dreaming of a battle before it begins. I gulp a bitter tonic of water and Xanax and return to the safe space that is my home office, ignoring the day's clock ticking down outside my window. The second poem that I'll be reading is entitled Snow in April. And I wrote this poem a few years ago when, in the middle of April, I looked out my window from work and it was actually snowing. And this, though it can get cold in the northeast of the U.S., this is very unusual. And so it inspired this poem, which is, I guess you could say, an eco poem. And like I said, it's titled Snow in April. In central Virginia, the dogwoods are in full bloom. Grass greens and wrens breed as bees zizz and aggregate pollen, disturbing the allergies of women and men. Ungaraged automobiles drive into clouds of pollen flung like confetti. But that was yesterday. Today, the grass, birds, bees, and people are bewildered as the encrusted automobiles emerge as fluffy featherbeds. Mother Nature halts her pursuits to lament, to moan and weep. The final poem that I'm going to be reading was inspired by a trip with my young children and my wife to an apple orchard. And this is a poem that represents just ordinary moments in nature with family. So this poem is entitled The Orchard. The dainty hand plucks a gala apple. Under the tree, I open the bag. Space for one more. Walking back, the cicada chorus whirs like a biker revving her engine before speeding off. Summer is nearly over. Fall is imminent. And yet, the heat continues to linger. As the daylight fades, we stop, plant ourselves, and eat an apple together as dusk turns to darkness.
Now, from one new pamphlet to another, we are heading to London for a returning guest to Eat the Storms, whose work often explores the themes of identity, femininity, religion and nature. And she's appeared in places like Magma, Black Bough Poetry, The Adriatic, and I'm very pleased to say our very own Storms Journal. She has a BA in creative writing from Bath Bay University, and her new pamphlet published by the Emma Press is called In the Name of Red. Today, she is here to share poems from that pamphlet, including Stars That Suckle on Darkness. I am delighted to welcome back to Eat the Storms, Z.R Ghani.
Hello, Damien. Thank you for having me on your podcast. From my pamphlet, In the Name of Red, I'll be reading The Art of Cloying, Estella, and Taste of the River. The Art of Cloying. A book can be loved to death and not die. Look at how this one refuses to close. Place the weight of the world on it and it may stop demanding attention. And if you choose to settle within it, this book, I once read but is mine, with the same intimacy as seeing the painless birth of sunrise for the first time, you'll find the smudge of fingertips where a cryptic word struck a chord and grew familiar. Pen lines preserve inspirations not to be forgotten. That's telling of love. What was spotless became a needed bed of the curious. If the cover is missing, then it has shaken its burden. It's dearer than gold. It's known the caress of eyes, and wants more. Suppose you, not knowing this, were to tape it back and suffocate the perceived disgrace. Isn't love tussled in the word novel? My sisters used to wrap their books in decorative paper, recycled from bygone weddings. Inside were curated words of warning, warding off eyes behind the filigree. I tore in with my shoes on and drew morbid faces. I loved every page as they did, but a little differently. The first book I knew and ever kissed was a Quran. I peered at the words but could not seize them, so I untied the embroidered cloth with my clean hands. The dizzying calligraphy lay under my eyes, bold, like the gates of Jannah, prohibiting girls who don't listen. My tongue wrestled to weave sense amid my shattered selves. My instincts grappled with Estella, Miss Sharp, Miss Eyre. When I'd rummaged their pages with laughter, tears, prayer. Estella. Just remind me that I'm desirable. You may kiss my hand if you wish to feel something I can't. Don't ask if I've buried my heart darker than chimney sweeps, body sealed inside a riddle, slippery walls, a stuffed crow with a bright stare betraying the scores of lovers that have turned to stone. I nibble on affection, old owl eyes, thickly clad in corsets, crinoline dress, night black, unfurling myself in London, hunting for fresh flesh. I am my mother's jewel, a showpiece, though a touch could slice. A star that suckles on darkness, I land beneath your shadow, your heart in my hand. Taste of the river. I remember in my mouth the taste of the river. The rocks in my pockets felt familiar. There were souvenirs from my father, the lonesome traveller, who chewed the fish's eyes and gave me its opalescent flesh. I once dreamt of settling into that photograph, where I'm forcing a smile next to a happy sibling. That split-second indifference, caught forever.
From London, we are heading to Belfast now, and I'm delighted to say we have another new pamphlet about to be shared with us by our next guest, who again is another very welcomed returning stormer. He is an independent Irish poet, born in Tyrone, working for the Belfast Trust, and has had poems published in various journals, both online and in print. He was the winner of the Matrix Poetry Prize in 2017. His first chapbook was published by Button Press in 2021 called Silent Stigma Loud Leaf, which you've already heard here on the podcast. He followed that with Gently But a Dream in 2022, and Sleevelotes is his new pamphlet from which you're going to hear poems today. Away from the podcast, this guest and I and 18 others are currently sharing a Zoom room every Saturday morning together as awardees of the Northern Soul Roadshow, created by the Irish Writers' Centre and Fiona O'Rourke. And very soon we'll all be in Belfast reading together at the Linen Hall Library on the 22nd of March to celebrate our roadshow journey. But for now, please sit back in the bloody brilliant company of Marty McKenna.
Hi Damien, lovely to be back on Eat the Storms podcast. Really pleased to be here again. Thank you so much. I'm going to read 5 poems today from my forthcoming chapbook that's just released yesterday. It's called Sleeve Notes, and it deals with quite heavy issues such as schizophrenia and homelessness. And yeah, I'm just going to read the 5 untitled poems now for you. Thanks again for having me on. Take care. So this is my first poem, and it's untitled. It's different on the way home. You're there, I imagine. Space to exhale from the mistakes of the day. The diary talks a good home, but has become increasingly disillusioned. It's different, this home I carry around in my shirt pocket. I hold you like a photograph, as close as the gutter to the stars. Okay, so this is poem 2, and it's also untitled. To leave would be to upset the balance of the universe, a deep sea-shaped hole in the middle of this, us. The creation fable scurries around me, and prophets and the angels, the wolves and vixen, this softly spoken town with knives in its sleeves. Raspberries and oranges, coffee and treacle, you bring it all with you. The loss of the parts of each other sting like lemons and limes.
I've ripped apart the old apple, bruised you, bent you. Neat as a scribble, it sits in my mind. Okay, so this is the third poem and it's also untitled. I soothe the song close to me, close my eyes. The finger picking closer. The words of your song in me. Your lilt softens the night as we flow in softer and softer. The low lights cover the page and a poet comes to melody, as soft as reaching for velvet ink. Around my first, my second glass, lost now among the fever of his box, his words, his slick steel six strings. As I leave this place behind, I wonder what the words we would have made were. I'm comforted by your garden, and in this mist, your homemade bread. Okay, so this is my fourth poem, and it's also untitled. I turn around 10 paces past and return to him, playing this slow harmony on a tin whistle. He looked like he couldn't play a tune, but this long string of notes, so sorrowful, so powerful, no one else would ever hear, never to be replicated, it blew my mind. I uttered a gasp of fuck me. I had to. Okay, final poem today is poem 5. It's also untitled. Utterly her, utterly defying the chaos, alone and standing brave in its face as I watch the armed response grow, pollute this home. I find the only flame in the city to take my mind off this chaotic life I've found myself in. I say found, it is my design, my sketch at life. I settle before the fire in White's Tavern and share this one with you. So much of this story was wrapped itself into me. I take cues from this, wait to mention one and sup from it. The flame a feather before the majesty of her fire. Thanks everyone, have a lovely day.
As we've now heard from all 4 of our guests on today's show, it can only mean one thing. It's time to deep dive and go behind the storms. And welcome back, Anne Tannam. Today, I am delighted to welcome to the podcast, joining me for our Behind the Storms chat, looking at the reasons we fell in love with poetry in the first place, Anne Tannam. The author of 3 collections of poetry. Her debut was Take This Life, published by Word on the Street, publishers in 2011, followed by Tides Shifting Across My Sitting Room Floor, published by Salmon Poetry in 2017, and most recently 26 Letters of a New Alphabet, also from Salmon in 2021. And coming very soon, make room on your bookshelves, we will get our hands on her 4th collection, Dismantle, which we'll talk about a little bit later on today. She is currently the poet in residence at Poetry Ireland, and in between all of this, she finds time to be a professional coach and a writing mentor. And thank you so much for joining us today for Behind the Storms.
I'm delighted to be here, Damien. Thank you.
And of course, in between all this, you're also a wife, you're also a mother, and soon to be a grandmother. Huge congratulations.
Well, thank you very much. It was all my hard work to produce. And hopefully this summer a little grandson will come into the world. And yeah, we are in every cliched way very excited and delighted about it.
And so will grandson too, when grandson arrives and discovers that just a few months before grandson's birth, the grandmother was swimming in Spain.
Yes, indeed. Well, in fact, there's swimming on both sides. This little chap's grandfather is a manic swimmer. So if this little boy doesn't take to the water, I don't know what's going to happen.
Well, listen, talking about swimming and beginnings, this is all about beginnings, how we got into poetry in the first place. And the other day I was snooping a little bit into your background and I came across this article in the Irish Times from last year. And you said that your 20s are a bit of a blur. It was the late 80s in Ireland, it was in a deep recession. You were a graduate teacher, but you had the only thing you could find were jobs subbing and temping in Dublin. And then by 24, you're married, then the kids arrive. So it wasn't until your 30s that you actually started reading poetry, reading it on a daily basis. And then as you approached 40, the voice in your head, the writer, suddenly wants to find a way out. So I was wondering, how exactly did poetry arrive? How did it make its way through the noise, through this cacophony, through this recession that's going on in Ireland at the time, to become such an integral part of your life as it is now?
Yeah, that's a lovely question. I mean, a love of language had been there since I was very young, but it was more in lyrics of songs and in books, but not necessarily poetry. I enjoyed some poetry in school, but as you rightly said, it wasn't until I got to my 30s where a friend, my dearest friend, Frank Jordan, had sent me a book, a poem a day, and I began to read poetry every day, and the solace and the expansiveness of the world when you
Mhm.
when you read poetry. And then when I think I was 39, a friend of mine who was doing a coaching course, which I subsequently did, she was coaching me, and out of that came this acknowledgement of this yearning to write. And before that, I'd never articulated that to myself. And so I began writing. I committed to turning up for an hour a day for a year to see what would happen.
Uh-huh.
And that's what I did. Before work in the morning, I got up an hour earlier and I wrote for an hour, and I began to recognize my own voice for the first time.
And I wonder, it's interesting because I think I got into music more than poetry when I was younger. When I was a kid, and you know, I was a typical gay teenager, so I was going into these storytellers. It was Bette Midler, it was Barbara Streisand, but it was because they told stories, they sang through stories, and then it became Joni Mitchell, and it was this lyricism. But I think for me, it was easier to understand songs than what seemed this sort of complicated, dusty poems. That in school it wasn't really pushed, it wasn't encouraged. But because even in your writing, you can see that music, it creeps in, there are references all the time. Was there a similarity? Was it easier to be attracted to music than to be attracted to poetry in the beginning?
It was easier because I had my eldest brother, David, who's 10 years older than me. He had a fantastic music album, vinyl collection. And he's a very good older brother. And he spent a lot of time with me, putting on albums, talking to me about the lyrics,
Hmm.
listening to the music. So I suppose that importance of having a mentor, to having somebody to point out, gosh, look what they're doing there. Look what the cleverness. So there was a Genesis, well before Phil Collins, but the old Genesis with Peter Gabriel. They were famous for their wordplay. And I
Hmm.
remember they had a great line. It was Knights of the Green Shield, stamp and shout. And it just sounded, so clever. So that kind of clever use of language
Yeah.
I discovered through music. I mean, in school, a certain Patrick Kavanagh's poetry would have really. I remember Advent, it really really having an impact on me. But I think so many of the poems I could not relate to them,
Hmm.
and that was, you mentioned there about I suppose the lyrics and the music of your youth as a teenager.
Yeah.
You're looking for something that says, I understand in some way your life,
Yeah.
and and hear the way of looking at your life that allows you to be the hero of it. I mean, I think that was something about those lyrics where it just felt like you could be yourself, but you could be this kind of extraordinary version of yourself and through language.
And also then hearing yourself through music, or identifying with yourself, means that you start to identify with a community. And I see even in your life now, like I know that I've heard David sing because he's been a part of your community. He performed at Who Let the Bucks Out in Dublin, I think last year and possibly the year before as well. So I still see him still being there, still a mentor, but probably now you're mentoring each other to a degree.
That's not the same brother.
Oh, that's a different brother. What?
I've,
There's a
I've
lot of
three
talent.
brothers. That lovely brother that you met, yeah. He writes he writes his own songs and he sings. So that came later. That's interesting in that that wouldn't have been an influence on me when I was growing up. That came later. But it is lovely to think that we do share that love of language and that love of yeah, pulling something together that in a few minutes hopefully tells a story or explores maybe a complex situation in a way that it makes sense.
And this is what's so vital. So, as I said in the introduction, you are now poet in residence at Poetry Ireland. Huge congratulations. You're the second poet in residence now after Catherine Ann Cullen. You're going from strength to strength. But what is key and integral to this position, of course, is bringing poetry out into the community, perhaps introducing it to communities that wouldn't have considered poetry or even ways of finding your voice important until now. We'll talk about maybe the specific role in a second, but I mentioned Who Let the Books Out. And I think it's also important for our listeners to know that even before this, even before you took on this role, you were very much already in the community. So Who Let the Books Out started because we all had collections that came out during COVID, during lockdown. We never got to celebrate them. Yours was 26 Letters of the New Alphabet. Then you decide with Fiona Bolger to start this celebration, these nights in Dublin, open mics, but also featuring poets who had a new collection out. I got to take part. Thank you so much. I see you shine when you were in the community, when you were mixing with fellow writers, when you were mixing with literature enthusiasts. Is that vital for you? Is that so important to see it growing, expanding?
I mean, I can't, I can't say enough how vital it is. In that, I was only writing a year or two when I really became engaged with the community, and again with Fiona Bulger. For 9 years, we ran the Dublin Writers Forum, which was a weekly a forum, and yes, it was a big commitment. There was about I'd say 450 writers came through our doors during those 9 years. It was an extraordinary experience, and I don't believe that I would be, not just in the privilege of a role like writer in residence, but I don't believe that my poetry would be continuing to develop the way that it is without this other side. To me, they're two sides of the same coin. You know, you're being fed by others are being fed by you, and so the idea of me going off and spending my life as a writer without being part of an incredible, vibrant literary community, it would be like somebody just pulls the plug on my energy.
Yeah.
And I love the solitude of writing. I love being able to step back and be on my own. You know, you need time and reflection and solitude for writing. But for me, the other side of that is you go out and you support other writers and you're supported by other writers. And so that's why, you know, when the role of poet in residence, when I applied for it, I knew that as much as my own writing was going to have an opportunity to flourish, that I was so excited about the opportunity to facilitate, to coach, and just to say to people in whatever way I could, your words matter.
And I think what's a perfect relationship, almost a symbiosis between you being the poet in residence of Poetry Ireland, bringing poetry to the community, and who you are as a writer, because as we said earlier, you know, it's very important for us to find ourselves in what we read and what we see and what we hear. And I think what your poetry does is you write of, even though your work travels and it sort of transcends time, it goes back into the past, but you write about the now. You write about these moments that are about they sometimes can be just about domesticity, a simple moment in the day. But what I've noticed is that you seem to take it and you offer it to us as if it's as vital to that moment in the day as the breath is to the body. You twist it and elevate it. And in that, we can see ourselves in these journeys through aging, in these journeys through parenting, in these journeys through romance, through loss. They're all things that we can accept today, and you write them in a relative, what I would find a relatively timeless way. So you going out to the community means you're already offering a way in to the people who are coming to you.
And that's what, yeah, definitely. I mean, that's what the aim is that, you know, whether it's in my role as a poet in residence or whether it's in my role as mentor or coaching, is that I am inviting people to open a door into their own life.
Mm-hmm.
And whatever that moment is that they perhaps before may have said, oh, you know, I don't matter, that doesn't matter. That
Yeah.
the capturing of it through language says it does matter. And in some way, we're also saying, I matter. And, you know, those of us, and you're exactly the same in that you're constantly giving back to the community. You know the incredible pleasure of seeing somebody else flourish because of what you have done.
Mm-hmm.
And I know the neuroscience behind it, you know, we get more of a serotonin, you know, hit when we give than when we receive. And so it's, in some ways, to me, it's simply a no-brainer, you know, in that people say, oh, you know, often, oh, weren't you great to do the Dublin Writers' Forum? They'd often say to myself and Fiona, and we would honestly say we got back 100-fold what we gave.
And so you're now, it's now, are you a year into, is it a year almost into the role of poet in residence? Has it taken a while to get into the swing of it, to get to know the community, to get to be a part of it, or was it relatively instantaneous?
Well, like, yeah, so like any position, and I started last May and it'll be running till May 2025. There's always a period at the beginning because it was quite a wide brief for the role, and which is wonderful. It's because it's supported and funded by Poetry Ireland and the Arts Council through that, DCU, and also through the Adrian Brinkerhoff Foundation. So there were quite a few moving parts to it in the best possible way. So for the first few months, it was just very important to go and make those connections, to meet people, to look at what was possible within the role, and then the pleasure really from September on of rolling out the program. And my manifesto for the residency was poetry is multiverse. You know, poetry for everybody, everywhere, all at once, which of course I robbed from the wonderful film Multiverse. And so that really is my role. So rather than me working on one particular long project, I am working with lots of different people within the community, working with DCU, working as much as I can with the wider poetry community through Poetry Ireland. And it's fantastic because I get the opportunity to work with people in their 80s, for example, a project called Keep It Lit. I get the chance to work with children and junior infants. You know, it's absolutely super. I get to work through my poetry clinics through writers all across the island of Ireland at different stages in their development. I get the opportunity to work with people who are transitioning out of the prisons system. So there are so many lovely moving parts to it.
And all of it gives, like you said, we both work in the community, but while you are dedicating time to them, all of that gives back to you, gives back to the scope then of you as a writer, because you're not just writing from your own lived experience, but you're writing from these shared experiences that you're hearing in the community, which becomes
100%. And I mean, giving an example, through DCU, I worked with some of the wonderful faculty in the nursing School of Nursing. And we did a project around bringing kind of a poetic inquiry into a particular module regarding non-human animals. And I learned as much from running workshops with Dr. Breach Casey, with interacting with the students, to reading what they gave us back through their assessments. You know, it opened another door for me. So it really is a win-win-win-win-win situation.
And yet, in between all that, you have a new collection coming out with salmon. So
Yeah.
like extra. So just going back a little bit, maybe before that. So yesterday I went off. I walked down to Rush. I'm here in Fingal, and I brought 26 letters of a new alphabet with me. Sat on the beach reading it. Thank you so much for the company. You weren't asked, but I brought you with me. But thank you very much. I found it to be a collection very much about being, of being settled into the bones of your body, of settling into age and aging, of settling into home, the concept of a home, of a house, what it means to have it, and then these universal experiences of what it means to lose it, especially, you know, relating to now and at the moment. Also very clever, such clever twists and turns within it, you know, beyond this body breathing. You go down into the earth, into the loss, through these conversations with those you've lost, fathers in particular, then down again deeper into the roots of humanity, back through time to the ape, to the grandmother, as we spoke about earlier, to the origins of it all. And ending, of course, with trees, planting roots, planting things in memory of those that we've lost. And as we said earlier, these glorious celebrations intermingled through it all of the everyday that you approach in such an extraordinary way. I also discovered this enormous playfulness that you have sometimes to lead us into difficult situations. Your poem, Schrodinger's Cat, and the health scare about cancer, but you approach it in a way that leads us in. And it reminded me of Foster, your poem that you contributed to the Storms, in terms of you bring us into the box in a very clever way and then reveal something that we didn't sort of expect. You also, of course, leave us with an afterthought. There's the afterthought poem at the end. And I suppose when I read that, I was thinking, is this what leads us into a new chapter? Is this what leads us toward dismantle? Perhaps I'm wrong. Maybe you could give us a little bit of a talk between the last collection and the new collection, how you approached both. Are they completely different? Are they very similar?
So when I finished writing 26 Letters of a New Alphabet, and I had felt that it was very much another stage in my evolution as a writer. I also knew it coincided with the end of a particular period of my life, which was the end of my life as a daughter. So my mother had died during the writing of tides shifting through my across my sitting room floor, and then Dad had died during 26 Letters of a New Alphabet. So I felt very much like at a very different stage than in my life. And I also was very conscious I didn't want to write a fourth collection unless it felt like something radically different for me. And so for probably a year after the collection had 26 letters that come out, I wasn't even too sure whether I wanted to write another collection of poetry. I wasn't too sure what direction my life was going to go in, or my writing was going to go in. And then from 26 letters, I suppose the voice of the crone, which I was beginning to move into, that embracing of this period of my life. I was at this stage moving beyond menopause as well. And so I knew that voice of the crone was going to be have her stamp all over if I was going to write another collection. And that's what happened. And I had applied to the Arts Council for a literature bursary, and like many people, you know, third time's a winner. And I was very, very happy to get that bursary in 2022. And I had already committed to myself that I would do a 4-day week and I would write on a Friday. And so it was my first time too having a collection where I knew that the theme was going to be the crone and all that came. And pretty much a poem almost came out a week, and it had a voice that was mine and wasn't mine. It came out on the page in a completely different way. It demanded little or no punctuation. It demanded lowercase. It demanded me to move everything nearly over to the right. And don't ask me why. There was just a sense of this is how it revealed itself on the page. And I finished the first draft of that collection in 2022. And then last year, and particularly with the support of having time through the residency, I was able to work with a fantastic mentor, Jess Trainer, and she was just such a beautiful light touch, but very much a very wise, very, very wise touch. It formed itself into a collection very organically, where the other three collections felt more like poems where I then, there was a whole period of crafting them into a collection. This came in a much more organic way.
Was that a complete surprise for you, or did you just let it go? Like, it sounds like you almost became this sort of, you channeled it, it came through you onto the page as opposed to having to work at it.
100%. It came through me onto the page. And it constantly surprised me what was coming out. But also looking back, it doesn't surprise me in that every collection is a mirror into that period in our life. And so this collection is both me and it's not me.
Do you have a release date for it?
Yeah, and the collection will be published in April, and the launch date is the 1st of May in the Irish Writers' Centre.
Fantastic. All right, it's time to pick an outfit.
That's you now. That's you, Damien. You're thinking of your own launch. You're thinking of your own outfit.
And so, what else is coming up? What else are you doing in between that, in between the swimming, in between preparing to be a grandmother? What else is on the agenda for Anne Tannam?
Well, the wonder of that is the residency will be continuing. So I have some lovely work over the next 2 months, and then in the summer we'll have kind of a different rhythm to the work, which is lovely as well. I'm doing at the moment I'm not doing a huge amount of new writing. I am looking forward to in the summer beginning that journey again. I mean, one of the advantages to having I suppose a fourth collection out is understanding much more the rhythm of the creative process. So I think I panicked after the first collection or the second collection where new work wasn't coming immediately. But it's very important actually to kind of honor this collection, honor that work. But I know when it's out there, a part of my brain says, that's great. Our work is done our creative work is done on this, and now we can begin to look at what might be next.
Well, it's going to be interesting because your first collection, it was 2011. Then, as you said, when you were writing your second collection, you lost your mother. When you were writing 26 letters of a new alphabet, you lost your father.
Yeah.
Going forward now, there's this new life coming in. This new baby. Suddenly, it's like new life blooming. I wonder what that is going to bring with it in terms of what it brings up creatively.
Well, it's mad that you should say that, because it is incredibly exciting and moving to think about a new generation coming. I can't quite articulate it, and that might come out in the fifth. But what's been really powerful is that Claire is my eldest, and her becoming a mother has shifted something in me, in that I almost feel that sense that I will now have another mother companion, that Claire will have an understanding of what it means to be a mother, and therefore an understanding of me that perhaps wouldn't have been possible until she herself became a mother. And so creatively, there's actually a poem in Dismantle called Using Story to Ask for Forgiveness, where Claire got type 1 diabetes as she was only 8, and we almost missed it. She ended up in intensive in ICU, she, you know, it was a really traumatic time. We thought we were going to lose her. And so on some level, I've written a poem using a story to ask for forgiveness. And I couldn't have written that poem until Claire was becoming a mother. So I'm really excited to see what happens in my life. And we know this. We don't know what is around the corner for good or for bad, but that sense of, I do trust now in the creative process that whatever does come, if we can use the alchemy of language, it can allow us. I mean, we talk about this in this is coaching talk, but we talk about compassionate distance. I think poetry, the writing of poetry and the reading of poetry, gives us a compassionate distance from our lives without, we still stay intimate and close to our life, but we have this beautiful distance where we can allow the feelings to move through us rather than getting caught.
Yeah. And you're also, I think what's incredible is because your poetry is very much storytelling, it's very much capturing moments, it's very much capturing voices. You're already creating this legacy, these history books of family for generations to come. You know, your grandchild is going to come up and can open your books and read about his mother, his grandmother, his great grandmother.
Yeah.
You know,
I love
they're
that.
already first gifts to give, wrapped up in a bundle, and it goes into the little chest until he's a certain age and gets to open and explore.
Exactly. And the cover of 26 Letters of the New Alphabet, his mother will have she designed that. And the cover of Dismantle, the artwork, was designed by his uncle.
And thank you so much for joining me today. It's been an absolute delight, and huge congratulations on Dismantle. I cannot wait to read it.
Thank you so much, Damien. What a pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Now, just before we go today, there's time for me to leave you with one poem, and you may have heard me reading this poem on the podcast before, but as Anne Tannam was my guest on the show today, it felt only fitting that I read it, as she gave it a prize originally in the Holding It Together Apart creative writing competition for the Dublin City Council during COVID. This poem is called Funny, the oddity of this Odyssey after Joyce. And if you fancy hearing former RTE newsreader, the wonderful Anne Doyle, read it on YouTube, head on over. It appeared in the anthology Fragments of Time, and it also napped me third place in the Fingal Poetry Slam in 2022. Funny, the oddity of this Odyssey after Joyce. Funny, isn't it? Bathing, morning after waking like drowning the dream. Tasting, eating, drinking. Old pants out, new pants on, up, under, in between, tightly tucked so as not to protrude, protract. Put away. I'm always centre. Others are right, and then maybe left, and then it's coat, car, blow someone a kiss, or kiss yourself in the mirror if no one has lingered longer, stayed, stained the sheets with sweat or that scent of something sweeter, and then we're off, out. Riding through the traffic, tightly tucked and now taunt, trying to get through the thoroughfare. The teasing, the tweezing, the twitching, the thinking about all the hours ticking, the tedium, the tick, the tit, the tat, the time I stayed and he left, the taxi where I held his hand while running through other traffic of another town. And then work. 'Cause work will see you through. After the greetings and the coffees and the doors and the cubicles and the pissings and the shittings, before the chairs and the desks and the turning it all on and counting down to when you can turn it all off again, after the meetings and the lunches and more coffees and the cubicles and the odours and disruptors and distractions and protrusions and protractions and the tension and the pan still thought and all the thoughts in between, buy milk, remember not to smoke, want to smoke, smell smoke, put it out. Go home. Cook, clean, shit or shave or shag or not or wish or more. Use her hands, his hands, their hands, your hands, anybody's lips, pants down over hips, pull the curtains, hit the light, save the fucking dream you almost drowned this morning. Funny, isn't it? Poetic peeps and gentle persons, in-betweeners and non-conformers, genders all and genders equal. We've reached the end of another episode of Eat the Storms, the Poetry Podcast. Thank you all so much for tuning in, whether that's been on Spotify, Apple, Google, Breaker, Podbean, Player FM, Overcast, Pocket Cast, Castbox, Podcast Addicts or iTunes. My name is Damien B Donnelly. I've been your host and producer, and the podcast is made on Spotify for podcasts, formerly known as Anchor, and the musical interludes are provided from purpleplanet.com. For details on all of my guests on today's show, head on over to www.eatthestorms.com, click on the podcast section called Listen to the Podcast, and there you will find a blog post for every episode. Today's episode is episode 6, season 8, and in that blog post you will find photographs, website links, social media handles and bios so you can be fabulous fans to all of our fantastic voices on today's show. And they have been Marty McKenna, A.R Williams, Anne Tannam and Z.R Ghani. While you're over at the Eat the Storms website, you perhaps might pick up a copy of The Storms, our new journal of poetry, prose and visual arts. Well, I say it's new, but it's now almost 2 years old, and later on this year we will be opening submissions for our 4th printed edition. So that's all for now. Thank you so much for tuning in, and yet again, before we go, I will reinforce the fact that we are an international community here at Eat the Storms, and we realise that the spotlight can only truly be felt when it is shared. So please do us a favour and share the hell out of this poetic storm, and thank you for your kindness. So that's it. Until next time, when you take a break and get poetic, try your best to stay perky, stay positive, be receptive to the energy all around you, and of course, as always, stay bloody poetic.
Oh, thank you.